Muted. A question and answer session. Today I am pleased to present Jeremy Martin, CEO, and Simon Ritter, CFO. Please begin your meeting.
Good morning. It's good here to be presenting the Araguaia feasibility study. I'm here with Simon Ritter, as you've been introduced to, and we will talk through the presentation that you've got in front of you, and then obviously we'll be open for questions. As an overview to the study, the Araguaia project is a world-class Tier 1 resource. We have a reserve of around 27 million tonnes, trading just under 1.7% nickel, which is one of the higher grade ferronickel projects globally today. The results of the study released today show using $14,000 a tonne, a base case NPV of 400 million, and that generates free cash flow over life of mine of $1.6 billion. This is designed as a two-stage operation, and stage one will produce around 14,500 tonnes of nickel. And a key point here is we will be using a proven process technology called rotary kiln electric furnace. This is currently used in around 40 mines globally today, and as such represents a low-risk option to producing nickel from laterites. In addition to Araguaia, we also have potential mine number 2, which is the Vermelho nickel cobalt project. This was acquired from Vale at the beginning of this year. Vale had spent around $200 million on this project, and we acquired this for a compelling transaction price, and we see this as mine number 2 and potentially the ability to truck high-grade ore to Araguaia to feed that second stage development. Between Araguaia and Vermelho, we have the potential to build a 50 to 60,000 tonne a year nickel business. There's a large metal inventory in the ground, over 3.2 million tonnes, and also the key thing about this story is the nickel market fundamentals, which are compelling in terms of robust demand and limited new projects coming online. Looking at the highlights from the feasibility study, as I said earlier, this generates significant free cash flow over the 28 years, around $1.6 billion, quick payback, 4.2 year payback, and the internal rate of return is over 20%. Looking at where we sit on the cost curve, the C1 cost will be around $8,190 a tonne, which puts this at the lower point on the cost curve globally. The other key factor is this is a long mine life. I mean, 28 years is shown in the study, but there's the potential to expand this over 40 or 50 years. Talking about the nickel markets, the nickel price over the last 3 years has moved up from the lows of $7,000 to $7,500 a tonne to a high this year of around $15,000 a tonne, and it's obviously dropped back to current levels. However, on the demand side, mid-term demand is running at around 2 to 3% a year, principally driven by the stainless steel sector. The new entrant into the space is the electric vehicle market, and as we all are hearing in the press on a daily basis, electric vehicle penetration rates are increasing, and if we take a sort of a consensus slide through the numbers, EV usage is due to increase anywhere between 20 to 50% between now and 2030, and what that means is anywhere around 500,000 tonnes to 1 million tonnes of new nickel on top of the 2.2 million tonnes currently produced. So a significant requirement for new nickel for the EV battery market. On the supply side, we have seen no significant investment in the nickel space in the last 8 to 10 years. There are a number of big operations which are going offline in the mid-term, and there are very few new nickel operations which have received funding to allow them to be construction ready in the short term, and this is why Araguaia has such an interesting place in terms of where it can come online in the market. If you look at the other key factor is nickel inventory, and we've seen the nickel metal held on the LME and SHFE drawn down, and we're now seeing levels that we haven't seen for the last 5 years. And nickel inventory today is sitting at around 220, 230,000 tonnes, which effectively have fallen. They were at their highest points up at around 400,000 tonnes. So we've seen a big drawdown in nickel inventory. And then if we look at price forecasts going forwards across a snapshot of the main banks, mid to long-term price is anywhere from 16 to Wood Mackenzie's $26,000 a ton. And just want to highlight, obviously our feasibility study is structured using $14,000 a ton, and it's robust down to current spot price. So all the key factors you want for a tier 1 project. Moving on to look at the study itself in more detail. Key technical factors. So this is a single line rotary kiln electric furnace plant, producing 14,500 tons of nickel in 52,000 tons of ferronickel. It's going to be a high grade product, so we're producing a product called Feni 30, which goes into the stainless steel market, low impurity. The deposit is high grade, so for the first 10 years of mining we're very close to 2% nickel, which puts it on the upper end of the global grade curve. Using a proven process, we've talked about earlier, the rotary kiln electric furnace technology, so low risk, low capital intensity, and the other key thing is we've got very good infrastructure around the project. Because this is a mining district, the Para State south of the Carajás district, we've got roads, rail, hydroelectric power and access to ports. And the other key factor is this is well advanced on the permitting, and we aim to have our construction permit later this year, early next year. Looking at the economics in detail, I'm going to hand across to Simon. He'll talk you through the base case numbers.
Thank you. As Jeremy said, the base case has been run at $14,000 per tonne, and that generates a net cash flow of 1.6 billion with an NPV of 401 million. It's worth noting that when this increases to the market consensus price of $16,800 per tonne, cash flow increases to 2.6 billion and 740 million respectively. On the capital funding requirement, the total capex is 443 million. Included in there is a 41 million contingency, as well as a 24 million growth allowance, which takes the total provision to about 17% of capital costs, which is quite a sensible and conservative position to be in.
Looking at the plant layout, it's worth just noting on the slide there that stage 1 is shown, which is featured in the feasibility study, and the area in the shaded blue highlight is designated for the stage 2 expansion. So all of the infrastructure and utilities around the site are capable of supporting the stage 2 expansion, which would take your annual nickel production from 14,500 tonnes up to 29,000 tonnes a year. Looking at the process route in a little bit more detail, the flow sheet there on the right hand side shows the treatment of the ore as it goes through the process plant. I don't intend to talk in detail to each of those steps, but in simple terms, the ore is mined using open pit mining equipment. They're all shallow pits, maximum depth 30 meters. The ore is crushed, it's dried in the rotary dryer, and then it goes into the rotary kiln, which is the RK part of the process. It's heated up to 800 degrees, that drives off the moisture and starts to liberate the iron and the nickel. It then goes into the electric arc furnace, which is the EF part of the process name, and there you heat it up to around 1500 degrees, you melt the iron and the nickel, that's tapped, upgraded to produce your ferronickel, and the inert slag comes out as a granulated slag product, which is used for further downstream products. The Feni 30 will be bagged, containerized and transported by road to the Vila do Conde port and then shipped directly to end user. So a very neat, highly refined product. Looking at environment and permitting, we're working to a number of IFC performance standards and also to the Brazilian standards. We're working to a very high level on our environmental and social permitting. We've been active in the region for 10 years, so we are a well-known name around this area. We received our SEIA approval 18 months ago, and we are well advanced on obtaining the construction permit and all of the work streams that flow into that later this year, stroke early next year. In terms of the community benefits this project will bring, over its 28-year mine life, it will deliver over 700 million in contributions, and that's either via taxes, direct employment, and also on-stream secondary employment and direct social investment. In terms of next step, with the release of the feasibility study, we're now moving into the funding stage. As Simon outlined, the capital cost is $443 million. There are a number of routes that we will be advancing in parallel. One is the standard debt equity funding route, and we see potential for around 60 to 65% debt financing. We'll also be talking to the private equity arena and also to the off-takers. So we will have all three options available to us going forwards, and the indications that we're getting to date are positive around Araguaia. Development timeline, a number of milestones completed. Obviously the feasibility today, we've got our commercial water permit. The next big permit is the construction permit. The aim is that we have concluded the construction financing package mid next year. We then go into the construction phase, and we will start ramp up late 2021 with commercial steady state mid 2022. So it's a fairly rapid timeline, obviously all subject to funding. So how does Araguaia sit globally? We've got a peer group slide here which shows all of the other South American ferronickel operations. These are all operated by major mining companies. Cerro Matoso in Colombia, operated by South 32. Onça Puma, operated by Vale in Brazil, and then two operations by Anglo-American, Barro Alto and Cotamine. And you can see there that our reserve of 27 million tonnes grading 1.69% nickel will be one of the highest grade of those operations, just to give you a feel of how Araguaia compares to other producing mines operated by major companies today. In terms of the cost curve, we will sit in the lower quartile with a C1 cost of $8,190 a tonne. That will place us in the lower quartile globally for all nickel laterite operations. In terms of low capital intensity, we have a slide that shows projects that are currently on hold and projects that are advanced feasibility and development stage. And you can see there at $31,000 a tonne capital intensity, Araguaia will be one of the lowest capital intensity projects in the marketplace. The other thing to highlight is that this is not just, Horizonte is not just a single project company. As we've talked about, the release of the feasibility study today is the stage 1 plant at Araguaia for 14,500 tonnes. We have a PEA, preliminary economic assessment, underway to show what the second stage plant will look like at Araguaia. That's to take production up to 29,000 tonnes. And we also have our Vermelho project to the north of the district. And we will be showing what a stage 1 RKEF plant looks like there. And between both of these operations, we've got the potential to take nickel production from current 14.5 up to 55 to 60,000 tonnes. This is a truly scalable business. So really to conclude here, the economics from the feasibility study have shown that Araguaia is robust at a conservative long-term nickel price. We're using a process which is mainstream, low risk, and is in operation in 40 mines today. We're located in a mining district south of the Carajás. We've got very good infrastructure and access to third-party roads, ports and rail. The nickel space is compelling, strong demand, limited new projects to come online, and also the EV driver to effectively lift that demand further. And our project is scalable, so we're starting on a stage 1 scenario which can be scaled to build a much bigger nickel business going forwards. We've got a team that's experienced in Brazil, is experienced also in delivering projects of this nature, and we also have a strong group of cornerstone shareholders led by Teck Resources, Canada's largest mining company, who hold 14% of the company today. We also have Glencore on the share register and a number of London institutions, and we're well funded. So we believe that Horizonte today represents a compelling opportunity to get exposure to the nickel market. Thank you for dialing in. I think we're now opening up for Q&A, so if there's any questions, we'd be pleased to take any of your questions.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If you do wish to ask a question, please press 01 on your telephone keypad. If you wish to withdraw your question, you may do so by pressing 02 to cancel. There will be a brief pause while questions are being registered. Right, our first question comes from the line of Michael Stoner from Berenberg. Please go ahead. Your line is now open.
Morning. I just wanted to ask a few questions, please. Starting with the construction license. Have all submissions been made on that? You mentioned that you might get it kind of Q4 this year or H1 next year. What kind of further work's required for that, or are you just waiting for kind of final sign-off at this stage?
Yeah, good question. So all of the requirements, documents and information has been submitted to SEM as the environmental agency. So there's no further information that we need to submit. We're now just working through any questions that might come back from the agency. So there's nothing material outstanding.
And are there any kind of follow-on permits that are required to allow you to kind of build any of the project, or the construction license wraps up everything between kind of now and production?
So the construction license is the main overriding license. There are some smaller subsidiary licenses that sit within that. These are the road upgrade package and the main power line, but they are subsidiary licenses that sit under that construction license.
Perfect. Okay. Could you just run through kind of how you guys think about the growth allowance versus the contingency in the CapEx?
Yeah, I'll hand over to Simon to answer that question.
Yeah, so the growth allowance is applied to all individual items made up in the CapEx cost estimate. Based on when you move through to detailed engineering, things tend to increase slightly. This is in terms of physical consumables and items of equipment. That running at about 23 million is pretty conservative, and we've seen feasibility studies where they don't have a growth allowance built into it. On top of that, we have a contingency that's been run using a Monte Carlo simulation. So that's using a risk assessment applied to each individual area of the capital cost build-up, which has then been aggregated into one contingency, which is running combined with the growth at about 17%.
Okay, perfect. And so, I mean, that's all looking at kind of increases and slippage. See any opportunities for any further optimization pre-phase 2?
Yeah, yes, we do. There are a number of areas that we will look at around package supply and in terms of where we're sourcing equipment from, and again looking at how things are supplied in terms of the bulk earthworks, etc. So there are definitely areas that we'll optimise as we go through into the detailed engineering phase, and it just requires additional detail to better go out to the market and get more colour on the pricing.
Okay, and then so when has the detailed engineering already kicked off, or is that happening over the next quarter or two?
So the next phase of work will be the completion of the basic engineering and the early works package. The detailed engineering will be required as part of the project financing. So we've got funding to start the early works, but the main detailed engineering package and award of long lead items will require the project financing.
Okay, perfect. And then the last one, on the second stage or phase 2 expansion, how should we think about that potentially coming through? Is that kind of looking to production in between 2023 and 2025, or is it kind of much further into the mine life of phase 1?
I think that's the right way. I mean, the PEA that will be released before the end of the year will give you the economics around what that second line looks like, and we would see that being given the approval subject to either increasing nickel price after year 2 or 3 or payback of that initial capital. But equally, if a partner is brought into the project, they may elect to go to the stage 2 from initial construction phase.
Okay, perfect. That makes sense. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the line of Dominic Fisher from Thistledown. Please go ahead. Your line is now open. Sorry, I was on mute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, good morning.
Hi, Jeremy. Just a question on the capital costs. When the largest element in there is utilities and infrastructure, how much of that is that's presumably local players giving you those quotes? I'm assuming the other aspects of the quote are more international, and this is a more local one. Maybe that's wrong, but I just wonder how that relationship has developed and where you've got to in understanding that number?
Yes, that's a good question. So obviously, a number of the packages are local. I mean, essentially all of the work that happens on the ground, roads, power, concrete, earthworks, erection, electromechanical, are all local contractors doing that. The process that we went through is we had tenders for each of the work packages. We went to the market. We obtained a minimum of 4 and typically 6 quotes from groups that were eligible and had showed track record on projects of this scale. We went through a stage 1 process, and then we added more detail and we reduced that down to 2 or 3, and then we basically accepted a final quote which was integrated into the study, and they weren't always the lowest cost. It was more about who had shown experience in that region on this type of grassroots project. So we're fairly comfortable that those prices are robust and are deliverable.
And given all the worries about whatever it's called, Lava-Jato, and all the contracting issues that have gone on in Brazil, you were happy that you could get a sufficiently broad spread and that without being too direct, that the people you're treating with are going to be there and not in jail, as it were?
An interesting question. Yeah, I think, I mean, if you look at the Lava-Jato, it hit a lot of the tier 1 companies in Brazil. There are a very good range of mid-level, intermediate group companies. This isn't necessarily a tier 1 group construction project, i.e. plus $1 billion, where most of those big entities that were named in the Lava-Jato were operating. I think the key is that there has been a step change in Brazil across all of the main companies and stepping down. And I think it's about policing the way the contracts are put together. And there's also an awareness now in Brazil that the days that we saw 4 or 5 years ago are not a way that you can operate going forwards.
Okay, thank you. And just on the phase 2, given what you said about if you had a partner who was prepared to go to phase 2 fairly quickly, if you went to phase 2, as it were, in parallel with phase 1, would there be a dramatic difference in the costing, or is it essentially 1 plus 1?
No, it's a lower cost than the overall 433 million, or effectively putting in a second line of capital equipment. So it would be a much lower cost exercise.
So it's a sensible thing to do economically, even if you can finance it, but you may not be able to finance it.
I think from Horizonte's position, we've delivered a capital cost that we can finance, i.e. the 430 million. If we were talking a number significantly higher than that, I think that would be a challenge in the current market for us to finance. Hence, we've added that as optionality. And if we are in a $16,000, $17,000, $18,000 nickel price environment, that's a very different proposition to be talking about.
Yeah. Well, congratulations, obviously.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for the call.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Just to remind you, if you wish to ask a question, please press 01 on your telephone keypad. There'll be a further pause while questions are being registered. Our next question comes from the line of Dominic Fisher from Thistledown. Please go ahead. Your line is now open.
Sorry, Jeremy. Just to ask you, on the Brazilian presidential vote, and is there any reason to think? I mean, I would have thought that was positive for this sort of activity, but maybe is there any reason to think it's either positive or negative?
I think there haven't been a detailed set of fiscal, effectively, points have been laid down yet, but everything that we're seeing so far in terms of sound bites from the new government is pro-business, pro-mining. The team that is coming in is also capital markets friendly, so I think it's all going to be positive for Brazil.
Lovely. Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. As there's no further questions registered at this time, I'll hand the call back to you speakers. Please go ahead.
Just like to thank you all for coming on the call, and if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to email us and we'll follow up after. Many thanks.
This now concludes our conference call. Thank you all for attending. You may now disconnect your lines.